Talk Like an Egyptian, a podcast about ancient Egypt with Dr. Chris Naunton and Izzy Lawrence. In this episode, we give you Egyptology 101, a covering of the basics-ish, with a few distractions as well.
Hello and welcome back to, it is our second series. We actually did it, thanks to the
second
Patreons.
series.
Second series. That, in case you didn't know who that was, that is Dr. Chris Naunton, who is an Egyptologist.
Oh, hello.
I am Izzy Lawrence, who is not an Egyptologist, though I do write books, which include ones about ancient Egypt, but for kids, so they don't count. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I was going to for having us round for dinner, like we're in your ears for dinner.
It's kind of
That'd be
like
disgusting.
I think that's okay.
I think it's worse in so many respects because, if we were out for dinner, you could chuck us out. I suppose you could take your AirPods out. Don't do that, though. We've got things about ancient Egypt to talk to you about. Chris suggested this as the. I'm not convinced that this is going to be like a winner in terms of hey, how do we get people to listen to Series 2? Egyptology 101.
Well, what I thought was that that we should just do a quick rundown. We probably should have done this at the start of the last series, or at least that's when I should have suggested it. We should do a quick rundown of what this is all about. And I was thinking, just sort of gather together all the things that people think Egyptology is all about. And this isn't about me going, well, actually, no, it's not about pyramids. It's about abnormal hieratic. That's not what this episode is about.
It sounds like it might be about that, though.
We will get to abnormal hieratic, just probably not until sort of series 402.
Okay.
But yeah, no. So for now, it's just about embracing all the pyramids and mummies and hieroglyphs and all the things that people think Egyptology is, and maybe even seeing if I've got it right, and actually everybody thinks it's something else.
I think there's a danger. This is like, when you're an undergraduate and it's your first lecture and you go in there and it's just the professor just going, these are called books. And this is a library and this is where you get the books from. That's it's not going to be that.
No. It's just about saying, here are the things that you probably thought it was all about anyway, and you were right. And and using that as a kind of springboard, and also trying to explain, so as we're not just going bowling in on any other topics and not explaining things. And actually, this is prompted by a comment from a listener. So
people leave comments. They leave them under your YouTube channel.
Yeah, lots of comments there.
They also leave them on our Patreon, which we have. So thank you to all our patrons, where you can get extra content type things.
There's the odd thing here and there on the social media things as well.
What was the comment then?
Well, that you needed some prior knowledge in order to get to grips with some of the content in some of the episodes, and so that that maybe the podcast wouldn't appeal to people who come with no prior knowledge. And I thought, well, we're trying to do this for people who don't have any prior knowledge, and also hoping that there's something for people that do. So I just thought, I challenge accepted.
All right, this is where you start. I'll put SOS start here as a subcategory. Where we're going to begin then, because Egyptology, ancient Egypt, go.
Okay. So what I thought was that we should do, where was it? Which is maybe not as stupid a question as you might think. Obviously it was in Egypt, but how do we define that? Mm-hmm. When was it? And again, people might think, well, it was a long time ago in the past, isn't it? Well, we can probably be a bit more precise about it than that. We can also say what it's not in terms of chronology. So, Egyptology tends to stop, oddly enough, at a certain point in history. And then I thought we could do things like language and script. Hieroglyphs are not the language of the Egyptians. Maybe this is just going to be a whole episode of me being a pedant.
Well, I quite like...
Who doesn't love that?
I like pedantic people. 1, because they're easy to wind up, and 3, because... Anyway, good. That was a joke. Thank you.
Very good.
This is why I'm here. So, okay. So let's say ancient Egypt. Well, where? Let's do location. We've kind of covered this when we did the episode about the Nile, but let's just really sort of pin it down to where we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry if we did deal with this previously, but for the Egyptians, obviously the Nile Valley and the Delta is basically defines the country, and as we might have said in the past, either side of the Nile, and the Nile conveniently runs almost dead straight south to north, which is also very kind of helpful, and it's heading towards the Mediterranean. So if you imagine Egypt as being like a great big rectangle, it's not quite like that, of course. The top side of it is the Mediterranean coast. The eastern side of it, on the right hand side, as you look at the map, is the Red Sea. The left hand side, if you like, is in fact an arbitrary straight line that modern geographers have just drawn, running straight through the desert from the Mediterranean coast, going a long way, hundreds of kilometers south. To the west of that is what's now Libya. And in fact, in ancient times, ancient writers described everything to the west of the Nile Valley as Libya, and everything to the right of the east of the Nile Valley as Arabia. Curiously enough, and then the bottom of that rectangle, if you like, would be another arbitrary straight line running from the Red Sea in the east to the right, all the way over to that border with Libya to the west. So in ancient times, as in modern times, some of those things are still the same. So the Mediterranean coast is in the same place. Actually, not entirely in exactly the same place, but more or less.
Coastal erosion. We need an episode on that. Precisely.
Yes, exactly. The Red Sea coast is more or less where it is. You've got a little bit of Sinai Peninsula up in the northeast as well, of course. The western boundary, as I say, is this kind of arbitrary line in the desert, which of course is uninhabitable now as it was in ancient times. So where the actual boundary is kind of a bit moot, really, because nobody's there anyway, arguing over where exactly it should be.
Wasn't always like that. Human race had a lot of time in that desert back in the Neolithic. I mean, really, because there's just an amazing cave paintings and stuff with people hunting and dancing and doing all of their things in the Sahara Desert, which was then not a desert, but that is tens of thousands of years ago, so way before ancient Egypt.
See, for example, the next point about exactly when ancient Egypt was, because when we're talking about, sorry, I'm skipping ahead here. When we're talking about ancient Egypt, we're talking about a settled nation state. And of course, all of that stuff, which you're quite right, did happen in the desert, doesn't relate to settled populations, but migrating nomadic populations. So the southern border nowadays is at what we call the second cataract in the Nile, which cataracts are these areas of great big boulders kind of strewn across the river, which are not so many and in such numbers and in such high piles that the Nile can't pass at all. It does, but they create kind of rapids, if you like.
Can't get a boat up there. Or you can, but it's hard.
Yeah, exactly. It's obviously more or less difficult depending on the level of the Nile. So if the Nile is very high, then it's that bit easier to find your way around big boulders in the water. If the Nile is very low, then it is essentially like the sort of river that you could just walk across on kind of stepping stones. So this second cataract is the second of 6. And we number them in a very Egyptocentric order. So starting in the north in Egypt, first cataract, second, all the way down to the 6th, which is in the region of Khartoum in Sudan. So the second cataract of those 6 is the one that now forms the border with Sudan. In ancient times, though, although the Egyptians from time to time controlled that area, traditionally the boundary was at the first cataract, so the first of these natural barriers in the river. And that's just a little way south of Aswan.
Yeah, so isn't that where Ramses II made a load of statues of himself going, "Girl, give me your money"? Is that...
Those are down towards the second cataract. Yeah, those are down towards the second cataract, yeah. So in ancient times, I say the frontier was usually at the first cataract, but Egypt did from time to time, the Egyptians ventured further upstream and took control of large chunks of what is now northern Sudan. But that region in between the first and second cataracts was always a bit tricky, difficult to settle. But the Egyptians built a series of forts along there from the Middle Kingdom onwards to guard their southern frontier and maintain control of the resources they want to control. There's good gold mines in that area, for example. And yet Ramses II, you're quite right, built 2 very large temples cut into the rock at a site we now call Abu Simbel, And we think that part of his aim there was to create such massive images of it's sort of him in the guise of gods, that this would be very intimidating to any locals who would not wish to challenge the Egyptians' authority as a result. That was the idea.
And they could take their stuff as they came through to trade. That is what I assumed it's about.
So exactly. So those forts are controlling river traffic as well.
Is that's the geography of the place? We're only really talking about stuff along the Nile. Talk about the Delta a bit. I think we covered the Delta quite a lot, but it's the bits where the Nile is so full of silt and sediment that it deposits its own load before it reaches the sea, and therefore that's why it breaks out into little channels, because it's just so full of gunk that it can't carve through anymore.
And also because the level of the ground is lower as well. So this is what rivers do, isn't it? As they approach the sea, they start to break up into different branches. There are now just two in Egypt, and that's because the land and the river have been managed. So there are two branches of the river, but then a network of irrigation channels everywhere else. Whereas in ancient times, in the days when that kind of engineering was in its infancy, you had many more branches of the Nile. And so as a result, rather than just having one very, very large body of water, as you have in the Nile Valley, with an area of watered and fertilized ground either side, in the Delta, you've got all these branches with watered and fertilized land it continuously in between. So it's not the same situation. So, and what this looks like on a map, of course, the river looks like a narrow strip of, if you look at a satellite image, kind of dark blue with dark green either side, and then in the Delta that the river sort of branches out into what looks like a fan kind of shape,
a D shape, you could say.
Yes, indeed. Hence the name. Very good.
Delta, yeah.
Hence the Greek letter D for Delta, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that's where we are. When are we? Because you've already said this is when we have a nation state. Now, I'm not going to get all 19th century on you about nation states, because that is a difficult thing to sort of say. But what we're talking about, I reckon, is a group of people under one government who call themselves the same names and have a sort of agreement of rules between them. Is that what we mean by nation state, do we think?
Maybe that's the wrong terminology, and maybe I'm a bit behind on this. But what I mean by this is a settled population with consistent identifiers such as language, religious beliefs, script, styles of architecture, art.
Tax.
Yes, exactly. And everybody, as you said, unified under the same government and with a codified series of laws that everybody has to follow, and with a judicial system for, ensuring those rules are followed and that people are given what for if they don't.
And also, I think part of it is knowing what you're not as well. So you do get a bit sort of upset when other people come in with different weapons and say, actually, this is mine now.
Yeah, so I suppose for the Egyptians and for other cultures too, part of that is in defining what is foreign. For the Egyptians, there's a very well developed iconography of people who are not Egyptians being trampled upon by the pharaoh, because that's what you do to people who are foreign, different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it shows that the pharaoh's powerful, that he can do that.
Yes, exactly. And it's as mean-spirited as it might seem to us now, it was all part of a very complicated means of unifying people and keeping everybody together, which ultimately is a requirement of thriving settled populations.
Awesome. So that is what it is. When is it?
We generally think, for convenience, of ancient Egypt in that form, having begun, as it were, conveniently or exactly sort of 3000 BC. You sometimes see 3100, you sometimes see a little bit less than 3000 years, but for convenience sake, 3000 years BC. So given that we are at almost exactly the year 2000 current era, give or take,
You just want to think you're a teenager still. That's all that is about.
Yeah. It's 5,000 years ago. It started 5,000 years ago, more or less exactly. And this is important, I think, given that we generally speaking cannot be precise about exactly when people lived and exactly individual people and individual events happened in terms of what we call absolute dates. So that's a certain year, BCE or CE. And by the way, you'll see this kind of jargon as well. When I was a kid growing up, we always used to refer to BC and AD, before Christ, and Anno Domini, that phrase meaning after the point at which Jesus Christ had been born. Because we live in a less sort of Christianized world, a more secular world, even since I grew up, which is now, of course, a very long time ago. We tend to use a less denominational way of expressing this. So we say before current era and current era.
I thought it was common era.
Common, yeah, that's what I said, yeah.
You say current. Oh,
did I? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I win. Either works, yes.
Well, it begins with C. So yes, I think that's fair.
Yes, precisely, yes.
But yeah, it's the era we share. It really upsets me still, the way that we have, the way that the ancient world counted down to zero, and then now we're going off into the future. It makes no sense. I much prefer the Mayan technique of just having a long count that starts somewhere roughly when ancient Egypt started. In fact, I think it's something like the 11th of August. When is it? 3114 BCE.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah. They start it then, and it starts on that day, and then it ended in 2012 in December.
Well, it's still a very Christian way of looking at the world, isn't it? Actually, and of course, for those in the Muslim world, you have a different dates, and for those in the Chinese world, for example, as well, they have a different set of dates. So perhaps At some point we will totally bin this way of doing things. And
well, it's the counting down I don't like, because people that back then wouldn't have seen it. That they didn't do that, did they? Were they counting down? I don't think they were.
No, certainly they weren't. No. But we can come to that actually in a sec, maybe. So the point at which a unified state comes into being is about 3000 BCE, about 5,000 years ago. We can't be absolutely sure when that is, and that's because the Egyptians were not using a dating system that aligns with ours. The Egyptians dated events, and they did record specific events, and they did give them specific dates down to the day. But they did this according to the year of the reign of the incumbent pharaoh, the incumbent king.
That's not easy.
No, so that's complicated because it requires us. So the system was that King Ramesses reigns for a certain number of years, let's say 10. Then he dies, and then the new king comes to the throne, and his reign begins the day after the death of Ramesses. The new king's reign begins on year one, day one in the reign of. But so in order for us to establish the total length of time taken up by Egyptian history and all these kings, we need to know how long they all reigned for and at the point at which they died. And we almost never know that.
Because they never recorded their deaths, did they? Because they didn't jinx them. They sort of disappeared.
No, exactly. Generally not. So we are dependent on things like what we call highest regnal dates. So first thing we have to do in order to establish the total length of time taken up by Egyptian history is to figure out who all the kings were. And we've got a pretty good idea of that, but we're still arguing about this here and there. And then the Egyptians did complicated and confusing things such as having co-regencies, what we call co-regencies, where you've got more than one king reigning at the same time, deliberately in a kind of partnership. You've also got times when the country was fragmented. So you've got more than one king here and there, and it's difficult for us to unpick that now. Then you've got things like what we call synchronisms, which is where a recognizable event takes place in Egyptian history that is also documented in somebody else's culture. And if we can somehow tie those two things together, like, for example, if the other culture, has dates that we can tie up more closely to our own, then we can align that. So basically, Egyptian history begins in roughly 3000 BCE, like I was saying. And depending on where you draw the line, it sort of reaches down as far as, say, the time of Alexander the Great.
Oh, okay. We're not going into the Ptolemaic era. Is that what you're saying?
Depending. Or say the end of the succeeding Ptolemaic dynasty, which the end of which is signaled by the deaths of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, and the absorption of Egypt into the Roman Empire, or the point of the Arab conquest in the 600s current era. Those last events are all fairly well dated. So at least we can be reasonably sure when those things happen. It's just the further back in time we go, the less clear we can be about when exactly things happen. So by the time we're all the way back at the very beginning of Egyptian history, with the first king of the first dynasty, we are much less certain. So by that point, we're sort of having to say it was roughly 3,000 plus or minus, let's say 100 years.
I'm also getting from this that if you're an ancient Egyptian, knowing your birthday, that's going to be tricky, because they definitely wanted to know how old people were, because they definitely kept a record of the pharaoh's age, because obviously he had his, head festivals and all the rest of it to prove that he was still young and fit and, doing all the things a pharaoh could do. But people must be just like, well, I was 20, but now the pharaoh died, so now I'm 1.
Yes. Well, the pharaohs didn't record how old they were. What they recorded was how many years had elapsed during their reign.
Okay.
But we are able to deduce how old they must have been. So, for example, Ramesses II rules for approximately 60 years, and we have dated inscriptions for those very, very high, as it were, very late dates. And we also know that Ramesses crops up in iconography and inscriptions before he became king, when he was still a prince of under his father. So based on when and that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon for us to see princes who we can then say, oh, look, you see that guy there who was a prince? He then becomes the king. Based on sort of when they appear and for how many years perhaps they appear in the records as a prince. And then just based on things like the chances are, he wasn't appointed king when he was tiny. We do know, in fact, that did happen at times. But, let's say Ramesses, we can assume, was approximately 20, or let's say between 20 at the very least at the time he took the throne on. Then given that we then add on 60 years of his time as king, then he must have been such and such an age plus his reign. So
run he was government old. In the United States at that age.
Well, yes, and who knows? Who knows whether there were all sorts of other issues like that. We would ought not to draw any other parallels between them.
No, they're very different systems.
Divinely appointed monarchs in the ancient world and modern politicians.
That's frustratingly cool, because I think that's how because you have people who are, I think it's Christians in the 19th century tried to work out how old the world is. It might have been the 18th century. And they added up all the birthdays in the Bible. So this is, how old everybody was, because people like Noah are like 900 years old and that sort of thing in the Bible. But they did that and they found out that creation must have happened like 4000 BC or something like that. So it turns out that actual science works the same way as...
yeah. I mean, Egyptology and no doubt other the history of other ancient cultures as well was all rather inconvenient for the church, wasn't it? Really, because
not necessarily. Some of it backs it up. You got
some of it does, but in fact, the Bible provides useful synchronisms. Some of those synchronisms I was talking about, because there are parts of the Bible which do record what appear to be genuine historical events concerning Egypt. And much is actually probably most of the most famous parts of the Bible that mention Egypt cannot be clearly connected with any verifiable part of Egyptian history. Some of them can. And if we take our sort of Egyptian history and chronology and then look at where those synchronisms are, the stuff that is happening in the Bible is actually happening quite late on in Egyptian history. So, inconvenient for people who want to see all the biblical events as having been the sort of, the beginning of the world, because it suddenly looks like, oh dear, the Egyptians were around a long time before anything in the Bible happened. Oh dear.
Any Ashurbanipal fans? He's in the Bible as well. And there's a few other famous sorts of people from history that are, crop in there and just go, hey, Bible celebrity. It's pretty cool. But there are real people in the Bible. Do not be fooled. So that's the time period we're talking. So you would like to go up to Alexander the Great, I'm guessing. You're not a big Ptolemaic guy, are you?
For me, the Arab conquest is really the line. Yeah, because, and I'll tell you for why. I mean, in some ways, it is actually convenience, the way that, for example, history books are written. Not very long ago, I committed to writing an overview history of Egypt in a book. This is not happening anymore because it was a silly idea. But if you start the clock running, tangent, Izzy. So we talk about dynasties. I feel this needs to be explained. And people will perhaps be familiar with us saying things like, well, Ramesses II of the 19th dynasty, or Tutankhamun of the Death Mask, he lived in the 18th dynasty, blah, blah, blah. These dynasties are handed down to us by an ancient historian, a writer writing in ancient times, a guy called Manetho, who was writing not very long after the time of Alexander the Great, actually, and he set about writing this history of Egypt, quite possibly for political purposes, to make Egypt look really great, kind of vis-a-vis the other great cultures of the ancient world at this time, the Near Eastern Empire of the Seleucid kings, or the Greek Empire of the time.
Oh, well, it is better than the Greek Empire. Everybody knows that. Yeah. That's just standard.
He wrote this long history, which is essentially, in fact, just a long list of kings. And he gives us their names. He gives us the number of years they reigned. And he tells us sometimes little nuggets of information. He says often where they ruled from as well. We can see that he's flawed. His numbers in particular are, it seems to us, all over the shop. But this idea that you group lines of kings together in these groupings, which he called the dynasties. This is the first use in history of the word dynasty to have this meaning of, a line of powerful people, like we'd speak of like the John F. Kennedy dynasty, or
the Tudor dynasty.
Yeah, or the Tudors, exactly. This is the first time in history that Greek word dynasteia is used to have that meaning of a group of people. And so he has, of course, he numbers them, and there are 30 of them according to his history. And the first king of the first dynasty being the first king of a unified Egypt. Before that, according to Manetho, it was the time of the gods. So that's when he set the clock running for human beings being kings of Egypt, and we follow this today. And even though this was a guy who was writing based on flawed records and bias, and he had the idea that before the kings, the gods were ruling the guy, all those sorts of funny things that we now don't think are right. We still use his dynasties as the basic framework for Egyptian history. So as I mentioned, we can't really use absolute dates. I can't tell you that the first king of the first dynasty, whose name even we're not entirely sure about, which we think it might be Menes, or we think it might be Narmer, or we think it might be Horus Ha. We're not sure. We can't say that they came to the throne for the first time or conquered all the other people and brought everyone together in such and such a year BCE. But the dynasties help us in that. So we can't even say, people are still arguing, about, say, the year of the death of Tutankhamun, something, that you might think we'd have figured out by now. We can't say that, but we can say that it happened in that king's year 8 or 9-ish, something like that, and that takes place towards the end of the 18th dynasty. So in the absence of absolute dates, we need a framework, and we use Manetho's dynasties for that. But
I find it very interesting that you want to end with because I personally am a massive fan of the Arab conquest, because I have this sort of like dream that one day I'll write the fantasy novel, because isn't it, what's his name? It's like Gibraltar's named after him, but he's like because Gibraltar is the Spanish for mountain of Tariq, so it's because it's Jabal Tariq. I think it's
from the Arabic.
Yeah. His name was like Tariq Ibn Zayed or something. Forgive me if I've got that wrong. Yep, I will make a thing. But anyway, he was great, and he basically just went because the Muslims basically told, go spread the word, and so everybody went nuts for Islam, and they just basically conquered the entirety of North Africa. And then Tariq just went, I'm going to go north, and so he conquered Gibraltar, got into Spain, got all the way up to Spain before the bosses back home just went, actually, can you stop now? Because literally the only reason that we're not Muslim is because they told Tariq to stop. Because there was nothing, he just conquered everything so easily because they were just so much more advanced militarily than sort of, post-Roman medieval Europe. And I just think how interesting if we'd had a difference to, Middle Eastern religion. Henry VIII wouldn't have had a problem, would he? Could have had multiple wives. That would have been brilliant.
That would have saved them.
Exactly. History would have been entirely different. So yeah, every time I sort of hear about, this big invasion that happens to North Africa from, it just makes my head explode with what could have been.
Yeah, well, and of course that is, exactly. So we're sort of thinking, oh no, our country would be different. Well, this is exactly what happened in Egypt at that point. And the reason I would say that is probably the best end point. You could end with the end of the 30th dynasty on the basis that that's where Manetho stopped. You could end with the deaths of Cleopatra and Mark Antony and the absorption of Egypt into the Roman Empire, because that's the point at which Egypt loses its independence and becomes part of Rome. But actually, even under the Romans, under the Ptolemies, who were Greek in origin, and under the Romans, and even if you wind back further, obviously Alexander the Great was pharaoh, he was Greek. If you wind back further, Egypt had been under the control of the Persian Empire, under the control of the Kushites. Pharaohs had been Libyan influence, blah, blah, blah. But even under the Romans, even under as late as that, pagan worship of the traditional Egyptian gods survived. The Egyptian people continued to speak Egyptian. Yes, the administration was kind of was largely sort of Hellenized, and there were religions that combined Greek gods and Egyptian gods. But the majority of the Egyptian population would have continued, at least in the early part of the Roman period, to have believed in their gods and spoken their language and to have gone to their temples. So in other words, in that sense, the ordinary people in Egypt wouldn't really have changed their lives very much. The first big change comes with Christianity. But actually, even with Christianity, it doesn't change the language and script. It might change it a bit, but it doesn't. There's no sort of big moment, and Christianity spreads kind of gradually. There's no single point at which, say, an army comes in and says, "Right, you're all going to be Christian now." And actually, even with the Arab conquest, it's not, of course, instant. But there is a moment at which Egypt is invaded, taken over by Muslims, and the idea is that, the country is now going to become Muslim. And that's the point at which the language changes from Egyptian to Arabic. The script changes from Coptic to Arabic. The temples are comprehensively abandoned, and in fact, a lot of pagan Egyptian temples had come to be converted for Christianity, even if they were sort of vandalized in the process, actually. But so, you can see what I'm getting at here. That it's the Arab conquest which is the point at which the culture of the ancient Egyptians, and this is what we were talking about earlier, in terms of the identifiers like religious beliefs, art and architecture, language and scripts. It's the Arab conquest that replaces all of that. So Egypt is today a Muslim country, predominantly Muslim. People speak Arabic and they go to the mosque. That all starts with the Arab conquest. And prior to that, and I think it's sometimes because of the terminology we use, we tend to think of the later stages of Egypt, the Roman, late antique, Christian phases, as being something different. I love the fact that word Copt, and when we talk about Egyptian Christians today, we call them Copts, and Copt are Christian, not Muslim. But actually, that word Copt has the same stem as the word Egypt. They both come from the Greek Aiguptos. That word Aiguptos has morphed into our Egypt. It's also become Copt, Gupt. So Coptic, it has come to mean Christian Egyptian, but in fact, it's just the Christians are the survival of the ancient Egyptian culture, if you like. And they're now something like 10% of the population in Egypt, but they're the true survivors, if you like, in some ways.
Well, I believe that it was the Coptic translations of the Bible that actually helped when they came to translating hieroglyphs, which brings us on quite nicely to language.
Yes.
Look at me linking.
Very good.
Thank you.
Good. It's almost like you've done this kind of thing before.
Oh no.
Yeah. So we all know about hieroglyphs, don't we? I think we all know that the Egyptians wrote in this funny script with little pictures of men and birds and other animals and all funny things like that. Hieroglyphs, or the hieroglyphic script, is the way we write down the language of the Egyptians. So in the same way, as we use actually a sort of a corrupted form of Latin, the Latin script, to write our language, English, those are two different things, if you say.
Well, we use, Arabic numerals, so we don't.
Yeah, precisely.
Completely
very good.
all over the shop.
Yeah, exactly. So we might think of we might tend, those of us who are native English speakers, to think of the writing that we use, the letters, as sort of, isn't that English? That's ours, isn't it? Well, no, it's not. We inherited it from somewhere else, not the Anglo-Saxons who gave us the spoken language. Egyptian is a language that's now extinct. That language is now extinct. And again, that extinction was brought about by the Arab conquest. The hieroglyphic is the first script, the first system the Egyptians developed for setting their language down on papyrus or on bone or ivory labels or on wood or whatever it was, as a means of capturing information and communicating it. They also had other scripts as well after a certain point.
Well, it takes a long time to sort of like draw a little man and all of the little like feathers and stuff, and like to do the birds. It's a lot of work.
Yes, you're right, and that is exactly as I'm sure you will know. That's exactly how these other scripts develop. So hieroglyphic, in the form that maybe people are most familiar with it, is chiseled into stone, the stone of temple walls or whatever. And yes, of course, that takes a very long time. But the vast majority of texts that would ever have been written down in Egypt were written for practical reasons of communication, probably on perishable materials like papyrus that hasn't survived. And yes, and if you're a scribe with a pen made of a reed and some ink, and wanting to write something down very quickly on a papyrus, a letter or a receipt or a tax document, kind of boring thing that isn't nearly so mystical and interesting as hieroglyphs.
Don't want to put like pretty faces and stuff.
No, in the same way as if I wanted to send you a quick note and say, I'm sorry, I'm having webcam issues as usual, Izzy, I wouldn't chisel it into stone.
No.
I'll send you a WhatsApp.
You might just send me an emoji of a brain exploding. That is,
yeah, exactly.
And I'll know what you mean.
Yeah, or if we were communicating on paper, I would scrawl something barely legible to say, help, give me 10 minutes. Or whatever. So hieroglyphs comes to be written very quickly by scribes, and we refer to this kind of handwritten form of hieroglyphs as cursive, and that has the meaning of sort of handwritten quick. And from that, even more, imagine the difference between an inscription chiseled into the front of a new building and somebody's handwritten, joined up writing scrawl. The two things look very different. We might, you and I and lots of other people might be able to read them both easily enough.
I don't know if you've ever seen written Russian. It's a nightmare.
Right. So it can be very
cursive
difficult.
Russian is impossible.
Yeah. Or famously, doctor's notes or whatever. Very difficult. Various different forms of that handwritten form of hieroglyph develop. And the main ones are hieratic, which is the first one to develop. And then in later times, demotic. And by this point, you've got beginning to see a mix of languages in use in Egypt. So along with Egyptian, which is the native language and language that most people are using, Greek starts to become important for administration and among the elites at the time of, increasing Greek influence from Alexander the Great onwards, even before that. And in fact, the latest form of the script is the script that we call Coptic, again, which, because of the way that term has come to be used, we tend to associate with Christian things now, but actually it was just the latest form of the script, and that is a version of Demotic, so it's a version of Greek, the Greek script, but with a number of characters from Demotic added, because Greek wasn't capable of writing all of the sort of sounds of the Egyptian language. Yeah, exactly. And I suppose another thing to say is that we're thinking back to the previous point about how long it was and when it was. that ancient Egypt begins, as we've said, say 3,000 years BC. The Arab conquest is in the 600s of the current era. So very roughly 3,600 years. That's a whole heck of a long time. If you think that's a massively longer period of time than the distance between us and when we think Jesus Christ was around, or Alexander the Great, or Cleopatra, or any of these other famous, very ancient people. And during that time, on the one hand, Egyptian culture is incredibly stable and enduring. On the other hand, it did change. So the language that was spoken in the time of the very first pharaohs would probably be unintelligible to the language of the people at the other end of Egyptian history. Even though it's the same language, it had just evolved so much. In the same way as if we tried to speak English to somebody, 1,000 years ago, we'd probably find that it was very difficult to understand them.
It's so hard. There are people who actually do speak Anglo-Saxon, and there's a wonderful video where somebody's translated "Pumped Up Kicks," the song, and it's absolutely brilliant. Just singing it to a lute, and it's like, "Brother had a quick hand," like that, and you're just like, "What?"
Wow, right.
It's beautiful. We should say whether like hieroglyphs are, because are they, each one in its individual world? Are they letters? Are they symbolic? What are they? In order that, exactly. I mean, we've got to do an entire episode on language.
Should I try and do something really quickly?
Do it really quickly now.
Okay, so it's a truism among lecturers who teach Egyptian language that it's quite often the way that they will start off with a lot of students, because everybody thinks, oh, brilliant, I'm going to read hieroglyphs. Wow. I'm going to unlock the secrets of the pharaohs. And your first lesson, I've been through this, I remember this very well. Your first lesson is suffix pronouns. And you think, what? There's a whole lot of grammar involved. And essentially, the signs can either be, they can either encode sound values. So there are what we call alphabetic signs, which have a sound value that corresponds to one of our letters, approximately. One of our Latin characters.
If you've been like a tour of like the British Museum when you're a school kid and you're told to write your name in hieroglyphs, is what they get you to do for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you'll quite often see things like bookmarks or mugs that have got the so-called hieroglyphic alphabet. That's just the, what is it, sort of 20 or so signs that correspond to our letters. So it does allow you to write, a version of our words. But some of our sounds and some of our letters are not really present in Egyptian. And
like what?
Egyptian doesn't really write vowels in the same way, but the Egyptians didn't, and in fact Arabic doesn't have the same vowel sounds that we have. And as you just suggested a minute or so ago, there are lots more kind of breathy sounds in Arabic, and also we think in Egyptian, that are not present in our language. Lots of sort of and what are called glottal stops, which is where you use the back of your throat to kind of almost click. Exactly. So a lot of these sounds are very difficult for us, and this is why when people sometimes say things like, "How do you pronounce the name Tutankhamun? Is it Tutankhamun, Tutankhamun?" We're probably not capable of pronouncing it in a way that wouldn't make the ancient Egyptians laugh, or I'm not with my, South London accent and 47 years of very English sounds. I haven't got the sounds in my throat, in my knowledge, to pronounce Egyptian words.
When I'm not doing this podcast, I'm doing another one behind your back called Terrible Lizards. And that has got a dinosaur in it, which is from Africa. And they try to give all of these dinosaurs like names, particularly modern ones, that are relevant to the area. And there's one called Webisaurus, which with the click, and it's just wonderful.
And you've just done a marvellous click there.
Yeah, it's good.
Very good.
It's good.
Did you have to
I love
practice?
it. Of course you have to practice it. It's a nightmare.
Yeah,
but I do love it.
So alphabetic signs, then you've got what we call biliteral signs, which encode the sound values of two of our characters, and then triliteral signs, which, as you might imagine by now, encode three of them, usually consonants. As I mentioned, Egyptian doesn't really write vowels in the same way. So we struggle to pronounce a lot of these words, and Egyptologists some time ago therefore agreed that as a convention, we would artificially insert what we call an unvoiced E sound. That's an as in elephant, in between consonants to allow us to pronounce them. So, for example, the word for a boat in Egyptian is written with what might be the sound values that correspond to our letter D, P, and T. And if you just string those together with no vowels, yes, exactly. But so in order to pronounce it, we've all agreed that you put E sounds in between those consonants. So the word becomes depet.
But it could be dopot.
But precisely, depet is almost certainly absolutely not what it really was. It's just that we've had to agree that as a rule. The other and last thing, sorry, it's already gone on much longer than I was expecting. The last thing is sometimes what we call determinative signs, which have no sound value at all. So that, again, to use the example of a boat, that word might be written with a D sign, a P sign, and a T sign. The last sign in the sequence would be a picture of a boat. So that's not voiced, but it's kind of a help for the reader to go, oh yes. And when you've got synonyms, so for example, what would a word be? A boot, let's say. A boot might be the back bit of a car where you put your shopping in, or it might be a kind of shoe. So in Egyptian, if we were using a kind of hieroglyphic system of writing, we might write BOOT, and then if it was the car one, you'd do a drawing of a car.
Okay.
If it was the shoe one, you'd do a drawing of a shoe. So people would know, I see when it says boot here, it means the car one.
Are there any of them which have almost like grammar stuff? Because I know that Russian, we brought that up. They have a character called Fjordeznag. And they've got another called Mirdeznag as well, which are just put there so you know how to pronounce, whether it's a soft or a harsh letters. Anything like that in ancient Egypt?
One tends to forget these things. There's no punctuation at all. Mm-hmm. So everything just appears like a long string of things. So and there's no spaces between words either.
Yeah. Ooh, that came in. Do you know who the first people to put spaces in? Ireland, monks in Ireland in the 9th century or the 8th century, when they're copying out the Bible, they thought, if we put spaces between these words, it's going to be a lot easier to read.
That would help. Yeah,
and they're the first people to do it. Everybody else, everything runs on. Like Latin, all of those, all these guys just didn't think, I'm just going to space these out a little bit just for everybody so it's easier to read. Nobody
well done, Irish monks.
I know.
Yeah. Although, do you know what though? Having said this, I guess it would be easier if there were spaces. Yeah, it would be easier if there were spaces, but it's not. It's not that hard actually. Well,
if you're used to it, I mean, I'd say maybe in English, in blooming cuneiform, that chicken scratch, that's a nightmare. Like have you ever? It's like a migraine in a bit of clay. It's a night. I don't know how they did it, but especially without gaps. I mean, take a breath.
No, I know. One could study Sumerian and Akkadian in the department where I was learning hieroglyphs. Actually, that's another good example, isn't it, of a script, cuneiform, which is used to write more than one language, Sumerian and Akkadian, different languages, but both using the same script to write them.
And giving everybody a headache.
But this not long ago. The same true in much later times in Egypt, in more modern times, the Arabic script can be used to write the Arabic language. It usually is, but it also can be used to write Turkish. So I had it from the British Library. There are some permits given to early explorers in Egypt. James Burton was the one I was looking at. His permits to travel in Egypt are preserved in the British Library, and they're written in Arabic. And I sent one to a friend and said, "Could you tell me what this says? I don't read Arabic." Could you tell me what this says? And he could barely read it. I think partly because it was older, but also the first thing he said was, "Well, Chris is in Turkish, so I don't speak or really read Turkish, so it's not easy to do that." Anyway, so that gives you hopefully a kind of window on how that all works.
What else do we have to cover in this Egyptology 101? Because I think
it's a long time, isn't it?
Well, yeah, we've gone on a while. So, what is another thing we need to cover? Just so I know.
I was going to say gods and goddesses, pyramids, mummies, and maybe I've in my notes what I sent to you. I've said the top 10 most famous Egyptians.
Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we do a little bonus episode covering some of that, and maybe we'll do a part 2 of this episode later on in the series. But thank you so much for listening to Talk Like an Egyptian. As we've already said, I am Izzy Lawrence, and this is Dr. Chris Naunton, and you have been wonderful. If you have any questions for us, please do find us on our Patreon. You can go to talklikeanegyptian.com or go to patreon.com/Talk Like an Egyptian. We want to hear from you, and we will give you bonus content if you just sign up with us, because that would make us very happy. Thank you very much. And it is why we're back for series 2. So if you've enjoyed this, buy us a cup of coffee via sponsoring our Patreon, or buy another patron a cup of coffee, because they spent all their money on us. So that is the plan. But we have to say goodbye in the manner of an ancient Egyptian, which I've also been told by several commenters that this sounds a lot like Vulcans. But I'll go with that.
Oh, yeah.
So after 3, Chris, you're going to start it, and I'll try and join in time.
Okay.
Until next time.
Life.
Prosperity.
Health.
Thanks for listening to Talk Like an Egyptian. To support the podcast and ensure another series, join us on patreon.com/Talk Like an Egyptian and unlock bonus content. Get in touch, talklikeanegyptianpod@gmail.com, or use the hashtag TLAE. We need your questions for the end of the series, so please don't hold back. Remember to leave us 5 stars of newts and share this episode with your friends. Find all links at talklikeanegyptian.com.